Well, first, my good afternoon. It's Tuesday lunchtime. This is the Mannin Line with Beth looking after things all this week while Andy's on holiday. Chris is on the phones. We would love to hear from you about whatever is on your mind this lunchtime. Maybe something you've been hearing on the news today. We've just heard in the past half hour about the link span at Heysham, which will be out of action until April. What about that news from Spain, taxing 100% on homes bought by non-EU residents? We've also heard on Max Radio today about the potential new approach to drug policy on the island. And we've also been hearing about LegCo as well. Just what do you think about the Legislative Council? All that, or perhaps something entirely different. 66 13 68 is the number to call. You can text 166 177, email studio@manxradio.com, or if you add us to your contacts on WhatsApp, you can message us for free, 07624 166 177. Nick says maybe the Manx government should follow Spain in charging 100% tax on homes bought by non-residents to help tackle our housing shortage. What do you think about that? This is something that's just in the past hour, news from the BBC about Spain planning to impose a tax of up to 100% on the value of properties bought by non-residents from countries outside the EU, so such as the UK. And in announcing this move, the Prime Minister said the unprecedented measure was necessary to meet the country's housing emergency. The West faces, he says, a decisive challenge to not become a society divided into two classes, the rich landlords and poor tenants. Non-EU residents actually bought 27,000 properties in Spain in 2023, he told an economic forum in Madrid, not to live in, but to make money from, which in the context of the shortage that we are in, we obviously cannot allow. Any other thoughts on that news? We've also heard about the fact the Manxman's usual berth at Heysham will not be fixed until April, it's thought. The link span was damaged in an incident last year. Let's hear more from Amy now.
Back in August last year, the Manxman collided with a wall as it was attempting to dock in Heysham. The vessel suffered minor damage and its berth at the port was also hit during the incident. Foot passengers have been boarding and disembarking via coaches ever since because the steam packet company says there's no safe route by foot between the terminal and the vessel, meaning passengers have to be held there until there's sufficient space on the vehicle decks for the coaches. Freight's also been taking longer to be loaded and unloaded. Because of all of this, there have been delays for especially foot passengers getting on and off the ferry. Peel Ports Group is the owner of the port and is responsible for carrying out the repair work. In a statement to Manx Radio, it says it's been undertaking the necessary procurement process to allow for repair works to be carried out. It's now in the advanced stages of that process and currently hopes it will be back up and running by April. It's apologised for any inconvenience caused to the users of the link span.
Amy reporting there on that news that broke in the past half hour. We have contacted Steam Packet to see if they'd like to say anything about this. Some texts in from you. Now, we were talking about food yesterday and food prices, and somebody, it might have been Howard, actually suggested about eating insects. Des says the fundamental reason why certain individuals want you to consume insect-based food, imagine the profits they can make from that. Insect factories already up and running, no worries about running out of stock, low maintenance, low feeding costs. Processed foods are mostly chemicals, so you won't see much difference, says Des, in taste, colouring and texture, just like the original. Your food supply in perpetuity. See what you did there, Des. And that is his thought on eating insects. I mean, maybe you do that as standard already. Sue says Spain isn't really very nice anymore. I went there last summer and saw GP home tourists posters everywhere, which is a real shame. And texter ending 404 says get rid of 4 MLCs, take on 4 air traffic controllers, job done. Somebody else says we don't need LegCo. It's not elected by the public. If the 24 MHKs can't do their job, what are they paid for? £70,000 each on LegCo members getting paid. That money would be better spent elsewhere. That's another Sue there. I suppose, though, the job of the Legislative Council is as a scrutiny body. So legislation sent up there that's been passed through the House of Keys and then it's given a second look over. Sometimes those amendments are made and sent back. I wonder wonder, is it a case of the fact that we don't necessarily see all the things that the members of the Legislative Council do? We heard from Bill Henderson on Agenda last night. He's going to be seeking re-election. He's the longest standing Tynwald member currently. A lot of things that he said he wanted to achieve if he is re-elected for another 5-year term. Again, this is something that since I've been here at Manx Radio, we've had the same arguments, haven't we? Should the Legislative Council be publicly elected? How would that work? How would you make sure that was a fair process? Is that something that somebody needs to be brave enough to do? We've also been hearing about the ratio of teachers to children for school trips. This is something the Teachers Union, the NAHT, has got some issues with, and lots of thoughts from you on this. Texter ending 068 says, I support the STEAM packet regarding school trips. It seems children today aren't taught to behave in public spaces. They act the same in cafes, they're running around, they risk causing injury to others and themselves, then give abuse when confronted about their behaviour, a general lack of discipline and respect. Texter ending 625 says if the parents can't go with their children on the school trips and their child can't go, that's how the STEAM packet should do it with schools. Do MLCs get 6 months severance if they're not returned? That is from Roger. I'll need to check that because I know there is something, isn't there, about if you're not re-elected and how much pay maybe you get for the months following. Let me check on that one for you. Fran says, have the island's well-paid head teachers thought about getting the children to behave on school trips? You only have to look at the poor behaviour during the lunch breaks when children are allowed out to the town shops. In fact, you'll see most shops and garages have signs saying only 2 school children at a time. So I don't blame, says Francis, the STEAM packet's rules. I fully support the STEAM packet in this. The last few trips I've had, says this texter, where school trips have been on board have been a nightmare, with kids leaping at the windows, literally rolling on the floor, kicking and bouncing on the seats, charging in groups around the lounges and swearing and shouting. When they're asked by staff or other passengers, the teachers are unwilling to take control. The STEAM packet staff have to intervene. They shouldn't have to, though, but well done in this instance to the STEAM packet, says Allenson. The Nodding Dog government have chosen not to reveal who the MLC candidates are. What kind of decision is that? Asked texter ending 223. How can hiding this information from the Manx Public Build Trust? It's another step, says his texter, by the establishment to control Parliament. Sad times. Texter ending 562 says the problem with LegCo is there will never be total independent scrutiny of laws being passed by House of Keys members when they rely on votes from them to be elected. It's a conflict of interest, especially concerning when laws are being passed affecting society and the vulnerable. We have LegCo candidates needing to impress the majority Comyn block vote to be elected, which I find very concerning. Something else that we talked about on breakfast this morning were the plantations around the island. We know Storm Dara is a little while ago now, but the implications of that still being seen in several of the plantations around the island. Jules says there are trees down from 3 years ago that have not been sorted, so hold your breath getting the latest sorted. I suppose so, Jules, and this is something I know John Moss is going to be looking at again in more detail next week, but is there not something about leaving the trees that have fallen where it's safe to do so they go back to nature? I don't know if that is a thing. I stand to be corrected, but I do wonder if that is part of the thinking behind that. OK, clear switchboard as things stand, 66 13 68. Be great to talk to you on air about anything at all which might be on your mind this lunchtime. You can also text 166 177 07624 166 177 is the text number, or you can email studio@manxradio.com. Something else that was on breakfast this morning was the fact that the Isle of Man government, as we've heard previously, is preparing a new approach to policy aimed at reducing the harms associated with drug use. Now, this follows a directive from Tynwald in November 2023, and that was prompted by a report from Liverpool John Moores University Public Health Institute. Chanel was covering this for us on breakfast this morning, and one of the people she spoke to first was Ray Lakeman, whose 2 sons died from a drugs overdose in 2014.
2015, just after my boys had died, they initiated a review into the existing drugs and alcohol strategy. I was part of that. I watched it evolve, but we've eventually ended up with this report. We have an issue that we've got too much concentration on criminalising, and the people that I'm working with and the people that we see as more of a health issue than a criminal things.
The document calls for a greater focus on public health instead of criminal justice, as Justice and Home Affairs Minister Jane Poole-Wilson explains.
Prison should be reserved for the most serious types of offence, but where we can address offending in a different way, then we should try to do that. We do already have a drug arrest referral scheme. There is a recognition that people's attitudes change, and it's not wholly generational, I think, but I think most of us who have young children and grandchildren as well recognise that there is more prevalence and more acceptance, I suppose, among our younger generation. But I think we have always recognised that the Isle of Man's work in this area also has to recognise the fact that it's a signatory to certain UN conventions via the UK. So in terms of our legal parameters, we have to be cognisant and aware of those.
I'm being pragmatic here. We know that what we're doing isn't working. Statistically, the range of drugs is going up. Gangs are getting more violent, which the police acknowledge. They are preying on the vulnerable. To distribute, our system encourages that. They allow it. So I really think that any steps that we can do to mitigate that should be taken. If that means decriminalising, that's the steps that we should take. My boys died of an MDMA overdose. I know they died because they didn't know the strength and the purity of what they were taking. It was a powder. Didn't say on the list, this is enough for 20 doses. Don't use it all in one go. Didn't do things like that. They asked for something. They were sold it. And the one thing that I find very hard to understand, because we never really talked about it, I don't know why my boys took drugs. I knew Jack was taking them. He was dabbling. Sorin was the one who bought it on the dark web. He went through a lot of trouble. He researched it on the dark web. He found out what he thought he wanted to get. I have to accept, whether I like it or not, that it was something he wanted to do. I never discussed it with him because I had no reason to know that he was thinking that way. The only way that he could have been protected was if he'd known exactly what it was that he was taking, and that's a really painful thing.
That is Ray Lakeman, whose sons Jack and Torrin died in 2014 from a drugs overdose. He's an incredibly powerful speaker. There's much more to that interview. You can hear it in full at manxradio.com as a Manx newscast. But what do you think about what he has to say? Certainly coming from a point of view where he and his wife Sarah have experienced firsthand the ultimate tragedy of drug use, losing both your children. It's incomprehensible. So do we need to be listening more to what he is saying? Any thoughts on that, perhaps? Let's go to some of your texts and emails. Will's been in touch to say, how about people who don't own a driveway but own a car should be taxed for parking on the road? Douglas is so backed up, it's caused by parked cars. If you don't have somewhere off-road to park, should I really own a car? If your car is on the highway 24/7, then you should pay a parking fee. Richard, who has messaged us from Derbyshire this lunchtime, says, it's sad to hear that your school children have become as unruly as those over here. They are totally feral and out of control. Is this one of those occasions, though, where maybe we're tarring everybody with the same brush? Are all children actually that bad? I don't know. Apart from the cost of just short of £70,000, says Pete, each for an MLC and just under £72,000 each for MHKs, I dare not phone in with my opinion of them, as it's probably not acceptable on the radio. Now, John has been in touch to say, having been a member of staff who's been in a party of over 100 Year 7 students on trips across and were commended by staff and passengers on the behaviour of students while on board, I think it's harsh to class all students or children as disruptive. It's wrong. As staff, we are entrusted by parents to care for their child. It's sad that some parents let the children run amok and do nothing to stop it, but do not class all children as the same. I think the Steam Packet should reconsider and work with the schools regarding these ratios. We talked a lot about the cost of food yesterday, and texter 464, I think this is D, has been in touch to say, regarding food locally, last night after your show, I looked and compared prices from Amazon, Tesco, Agrimark and a receipt last week from Robinson's. If I bought it online, I would have saved £33 for the same items bought locally, and buying from Amazon isn't the best, but that keeps people in jobs. It means you don't have to use fuel. We should be able, says D, to shop where we like without critique. Children can be unruly, etc., but don't forget, we all were one day. It's called growing up. That's from Big John in Ramsey. Pammy has texted to say insurance premiums have gone up across the board 30 to 50%. Be warned, they may go up further after the fires in America. Paul says, could the limits on school children travelling unaided be linked to the fact Steam Packet has said children travel free? In other words, they want more adults and fewer children. Texter ending 718 says, I understand what Spain are doing. I think the Isle of Man should put an annual tax on properties owned by non-residents. What do you think of that idea? Texter ending 810 says, having used the Steam Packet route to Heysham on a frequent basis, I can say I won't be using it again, as the lack of care herding grown adults onto coaches that, by the driver's own admission, are only used for school children leads to a thoroughly unpleasant experience and is not represented in the prices they are charging. That can only have an adverse effect on people visiting the island. I suppose, though, to be fair, the links ban issue at Heysham is not really within the Steam Packet's control. Keep the identity, says texter of 762, of the future MLCs probably means that our current MHKs have already chosen their fellow people to join the Old Boys Jolly Up Club. £70,000 a year over 5 years is £450,000. What an obscene waste of money. Texter ending 951 doesn't believe that there is much to be done with the drugs policy as it stands, but we can go to the lines now and join Peter Murcock. Good afternoon, Peter.
You guessed who it was, Beth, yes.
I did, yes. How are you doing?
Very extremely well. Legco. One of the problems about Legco is, of course, that they're not elected, but it isn't the fault of the people who are standing. It's the fault of the legislature itself. They've had years and years to alter the system, and nothing's been done. Many bills have come forward. There was a meeting in Douglas not too long ago about the subject, and it was discussed quite widely. Unfortunately, there weren't too many people there, which was a shame. One thing that I said was that I think that as an interim, an immediate step, what should be done, and this I make it quite clear this is temporary, is to have the Appointments Commission to appoint them. In other words, take it a remove away from the keys. I think it's quite wrong that the keys should be the ones who vote them up. And the fact that they've been elected is neither here nor there, because they weren't elected to elect other people. But then that should be an interim measure, and there should be, therefore, a timetable of getting some proper democratic elections for it. But I don't criticise the people who are standing at the moment, because, after all, what other system can they use?
It is an interesting one, Peter. As I mentioned, this is an argument that's been going for at least 20 years in my experience, and much, much longer than that. But there does seem to be a reluctance for somebody to really take this by the horns and move it forward. So trying to make it democratic and open to the public, I mean, how could we ever see that working in principle?
Well, I just don't know. I think the first thing is you've got to take away the keys voting for the people, because even though I'm sure many of them would deny it, it's bound to become out as a clone of the keys. And I think you've got to remember as well that there's not all that much democracy with regard to the keys, because, as people have pointed out on this programme and elsewhere, when we vote in a general election, we don't really know what sort of policy the new government's going to have, because we don't have a party political system largely. We don't know who the chief minister is going to be. And if you look at the manifestos of most of the people who stand, they'll have a variety of things on. So it's very hard to know exactly what they're going to do. And that's another reason why I think you should take it away from the keys, because there's not as much democracy as there should be with regard to the House of Keys. And I do think Peter Carron, I may be wrong, some years ago wanted to try and make the Chief Minister be someone who was popularly elected. That failed. But I do think that there's some more reform needed to the House of Keys as well.
It's an interesting one again, Peter, there. I mean, I suppose, hopefully, when you are considering who to vote for in a House of Keys general election, very often most of the candidates will at least make some effort to get in touch with you. And I guess there's an element of personal responsibility. If the things that you want to know about are you going to stand for Chief Minister, etc., those are the questions that you have to put at that point. But then we get back to the idea that actually turnout year on year hasn't been brilliant in the past few elections, and people might sort of say all of these things that they want to happen, but are they actually prepared to go out and vote for them?
Well, that's a perennial question, isn't it? You can't. It's sort of it's like a chicken and egg situation. I do think that it's a responsible thing to go and vote. I've always voted. I'm fortunate in that we've always had quite a variety of people putting up. Now, I'm well satisfied with the people we've got representing myself, but I will always question them very, very carefully indeed and read their manifestos and question. But unfortunately, I think there's a number will vote for people because they knew your dad, or they knew your granddad, or, oh, yes, I remember your name, or you've got a Manx name. And I think that really needs to come to an end as well. I think I stood for the House of Keys many, many years ago, and I remember a gent coming through the door, and he read my manifesto, and he said to me, I like everything that you're promising. I put a very detailed things of what I was coming up with. He said, I like everything what you're going to do, but I can't vote for you. I said, why? He said, you're not Manx. And I said, so are you saying then that you'll vote for someone whose manifesto you don't agree with, but just because they're Manx? And that seemed to be what it was. Now, I find that extraordinary. To my mind, I don't care where they've come from. What I'm interested in is what exactly are they going to do? And that's really the crucial point. It's not the fact of who their dad was or what their name is. And anyway, we could easily change. I could take on a Manx name, and quite a lot wouldn't have been any the wiser. But that would be foolish, because that would be playing the system. Do you see what I mean? I think there's a number of things. It's not quite so prevalent, I don't think, now as it once was. But there are, in a short call, and we've covered quite a few facets here, there's quite a lot of political issues that need ironing out, I think, with our legislature.
Peter, thank you very much indeed for calling. Okay. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was Peter Murcott there with some thoughts about the Legislative Council and politics in general. 12:31, let's just take a short break. And you're listening to the Mannin Line here on Manx Radio, 12:33. Chris is on the phone. 66 13 68 is the number to call. We can join Betty now on line 2. Good afternoon, Betty.
Hi. I don't usually agree with Peter, but on this case, I think he makes a lot of sense about the Legislative Council. Actually, I would go beyond what he says. I don't think we need as many people to read all these notes, probably just one or two maybe. And at the moment I just think it's a place it's the old boys set up, really.
Well, quite a few women in the LegCo at the moment, though, Betty. What?
Old women, but I mean, you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. How aware, Betty, do you think we all are of what LegCo actually does, though? We know that they meet very often on the same day as the House of Keys. They're obviously there at the Tynwald sittings. But how aware would you say you are of the other jobs that they do?
I thought they just read what was going to be announced and made little notes on it. I don't think they do an awful lot, really.
So that's the perception then, isn't it? I think if people feel that that's all they're doing, that the rest of the time is pretty much free time, then maybe that's where the understanding and the feeling that we don't really need LegCo comes from. Maybe it'd be interesting if there's any member of the Legislative Council listening who could give us a shout and let us know what actually the job entails on a day-to-day basis. That might be quite useful.
But I also wonder we have 24 MHKs. I don't honestly think we need that many. A town in England with 80,000 people only has one MP. So I think if we cut it down by half, we'd have enough.
OK, Betty, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Some really interesting points there, and just following on from Peter. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you. Nice to hear you, Beth.
Oh, thank you. Take care. That was Betty there. So what do you reckon? Cut down the number of MHKs in half? Maybe we only need 1 or 2 MLCs. Let's see if we can find out exactly what MLCs do on a day-to-day basis. Texter ending 867 says, this is Alan, you pay to park a car on the roadside with our very expensive road tax and no more tax is needed. Des says, I don't know about anybody else, but I pay road tax to be on the road. Tony in Onken says, yesterday you were talking about things being so expensive on the Isle of Man. Drop the VAT rate from 20% to 10% all across the board. 5% to UK, 5% to Isle of Man government tax. That way, says Tony, all people have more to spend. The Isle of Man government does not lose out because all businesses would pay a bit more with taxes and having more profit. Roy says, let's do the same to Spanish residents. Also, as a foreigner, I'm not legally allowed to buy property in the Philippines, yet people from the Philippines can buy and own here. That is not fair to my mind. And G says, it only takes one unsupervised child to set off a fire alarm. Imagine the disruption out at sea. Let's go to the lines and join Bonzo now. Good afternoon, Bonzo.
Hello. Yes, about LegCo. No, again, echoing Betty somewhat, I don't usually agree with very much, and on very much with Mr. Dorikoff, except possibly the time of the date. But with much of what he was saying, yes, I do agree.
That was Peter Murcott. We should say Peter Murcott.
Peter Murcott,
yes.
not Dorikoff. Sorry.
That's all right.
Yes. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm getting on. Anyway. So one of the big problems that we have is, of course, that a vote really doesn't count in many ways because, firstly, in terms of who you'll get as an MLC, there's various sort of block voting of friends and family, as Peter was saying, and that in small constituencies, in a first-past-the-post electoral system, sorry to get all technical about it, that means that most people, the candidates who people mostly vote for, of course, don't get in. So you have people who get on a minority of those who poll, and that minority is a considerable minority of the actual registered electorate. And also then, once they're in, well, of course, because you've got no real political party system, whoever you vote for, the government gets it. So things, strangely enough, don't change.
OK, we've had a text in, sorry, Bonzo, which I think just goes along with what you're saying. This is a text from Brian who says, we're less than 2 years away from the next general election. It's time for a change in the way politicians are elected. If we don't have change, we're going to get the same for the next 5 years. We should have, says Brian, an all-island vote with a single transferable vote. That would mean those who stand will have to put more effort into becoming elected, and it would mean they'd have to have a mandate that would work for our national interests, which would override local area interests. Now, single transferable voting was tried a number of years ago, and actually a former MHK, Victor Neal, tried to explain it to me, and I think possibly, Bonzo, people found it quite complicated and didn't necessarily understand that system, but there are certainly calls that might be the better way to do things.
Well, I mean, STV, you'll have used it, I'm sure, in student elections, When you were a student, it was there for student elections when I was a student. And how the heck anyone thinks that putting things in an order of choice, 1, 2, 3, 4, is somehow ferociously more complicated and confusing than putting an X in a box. I really don't understand. I think that's just an argument always used in favour for not doing something. What we need, yes, is proportional representation on a single transferable vote, because that's pretty much the simplest way of doing it. But we also need elected MLCs in the same way. An all-Ireland vote, I think, would be too unrepresentative. And the idea that we've got too many MHKs, that I think is again nonsense, because we just about got the minimum needed for any form of real democracy. If you had 12 MHKs, what would happen? They'd all be in Comyn. They'd all vote the same way anyway. So that's ridiculous.
All right, Bonzo, I'm going to leave it there just because we've got other people on the phones. But thank you very much. Good to talk to you as ever.
Okay then, cheers.
That was Bonzo there, and we can go and join Howard now on line 2. Again, Howard, I think you're talking this afternoon about the number of MHKs.
Yes, Betty was on there before, and a lot of people have the same opinion that we have too many here, and we're only the equivalent of a large town or a town in the UK. But what they do forget, our MHKs now, they're not always high on my Christmas card list, but that is the way of the world. We are an island. We are a separate island from the UK. We're not part of it. We're not part of anywhere, only the British Isles. And the MHKs run the Isle of Man in its entirety. The whole lot. Everything from national health to taxes to legislation, whereas a town of an equivalent size will have perhaps 1, maybe 2 MPs. But all their legislation is operated from Parliament in London, and they will then just enact that legislation. Whereas here, I'm not defending the MHKs and the electrical, but we are an island, and they're always shouting about our independence. Well, the mere fact that we are independent requires a number of people to run the country, which we are. They were at one time saying Isle of Man PLC. That was one of their advertising lines. And that's exactly what it is. We are a separate country, and we do need, unfortunately at times, that number of MHKs to cover the ground, because I say the NHS, tax, general legislation, DOI, everything, all requires running from the Isle of Man, not from Parliament in London. So we do need, unfortunately, a larger number than what a town in England, Scotland, anywhere, of 85,000 would have. They are running a democratic, in brackets, government, which is the Isle of Man, not a borough of Merseyside or Manchester or somewhere like that. So we have to have sufficient number of members of Parliament, the Manx Parliament, to run the Isle of Man.
OK, Howard, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Really appreciate you taking the time to call. Speak to you soon.
OK, take care, Beth.
Take care. That was Howard, who says, actually, when we were hearing from Betty about maybe cutting the number of MHKs that we have in half, Howard said that just wouldn't work. The Isle of Man is a unique place. We're not just a borough of the UK. Texter ending 204 has been in touch on WhatsApp to say, all tarred with the same brush, very right, very unfair. I regularly, says this messenger, get the bus from Port St Mary with the Castle Rushen High School kids. Without exception, they are civil and polite. They're having fun. They've got mobiles, yes, but they're chatting. I've even seen some books. When it's full, someone will always stand up and offer me their seat. So I think it's lovely to hear those texts as well, because it is easy, isn't it, just to say that all kids, certainly one way or the other. Steve says the surname or ethnicity of elected officials does not matter in the slightest to me. However, keeping bias out of political decision making when it comes to religion is extremely important, clearly demonstrated with the recent assisted dying discussions where religious minorities have tried repeatedly to impose their will on the non-religious majority. Text here from 623 that says the Legislative Council candidates will be named in due course. This is not a big secrecy. It's merely a case of a closing date has passed and the list will be released in due course. We know the election is going to take place, I think it's the 4th of March off the top of my head. Texter ending 490 says, I've got a tax disc on my windscreen, which means I can park anywhere where it's safe and legal to do so. Start booking people parking on curbs and pavements inconsiderately. One day an emergency vehicle will be blocked from attending an incident. Just reading a story on Manx Radio, and MHK is asking why the Treasury Minister has arranged and guaranteed a £100 million loan from a bank to a private company that's redeveloping the old nurses' home. The MHK says the project is not finished, but the company has already lost £500,000. Is this legal or safe? Asked Pat. Remember the £120 million loan made to the company building the power station, and then it went out of business, resulting in that money going and the taxpayers still paying this off. Have our government not learned from past mistakes? Though I do agree, says Des, with those people talking about people parking inconsiderably and not having driveways, more could be done to review these issues. I won't vote because I can't stand the liars, says texter ending 376. Alan says we need to get rid of LegCo. Why have we got them if we don't need them? What can 8 do that 4 can't do? So maybe Alan's saying that actually it could be cut in half the number. What do you make of that? Surely LegCo discuss the same legislation MHKs discuss, and they're made up from the same group of MHKs. It's a self-indulgent, self-important pay position in order to fill time and justify more government wages. Children on the boat. So supervising kids on the boat is okay for 5 but not 10. At what point does the situation become too unruly? Is it child number 6 or child number 8? Any adult who can't control 10 kids on a school trip has not got the skills for the job, says texter ending 223. MLCs, they say they're busy scrutinising legislation. Maybe they are, but it takes a certain type of person. They ain't that plentiful that can read this type of legal jargon once and understand it. I see that being a problem. Are the MLCs capable of doing the job well, asks Jay. An MHK who loses his seat in Tynwald elections should be banned from being added to LegCo, that's the Best Mates Club, for 10 years, says texter ending 223. And government should take NI from all benefit payouts, says texter ending 382, as health is for everyone and everyone should pay into the big health pot. So many on the benefits payroll are enjoying, according to this texter, all life has to offer. I'm tired of the long waiting lists. I wonder if this is another situation though where we tar everybody with the same brush based perhaps on hearsay. Let's go to the lines and join Julian now. Good afternoon, Julian.
Hi Beth, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
All right, thanks. Yeah, just wanted to just talk about Spain imposing this 100% tax on expats and their homes. I'm just wondering, when you do things like this, it must usually be because they need money. Would you agree with that?
I think the Prime Minister of Spain has outlined that in the news that read out on the BBC News.
Yeah, it's just interesting to look at some of the statistics for Spain. Currently, one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, 25%. They've got 7 million immigrants, of which 1.5 million were brought in since January of 2022. There is also the point that they are now solar power and world leader and also wind power, but they're importing record amounts of electricity from France, which is kind of interesting considering the huge amount of money that was recently imported by the UK, up to £5,500 a megawatt hour, which is 82 times what the normal cost of producing your own electricity is. It just makes me wonder, they're obviously scrabbling for money. Also, huge amounts of expats are living in, say, for example, 20% of Alicante's population are expats. A lot of them are British and Russian, neither of which are EU members. So if they leave, what's that going to do to the GDP? Because, tourism is a major part of the money coming into Spain. Malaga, Barcelona, huge amounts of British expats. So you just got to wonder, where's this all going to lead, and why do they need all this money? Is it because they're even talking about healthcare, really feeling the strain? I've been looking at videos of lines and lines of what appear to be North Africans outside hospitals and care centres in Barcelona, Madrid, Malaga. This makes you wonder, why do they need to put 100% tax on things? They must be scrabbling for money, it looks like.
A lot of statistics you threw out there, Julian. Where were you getting those from?
This is even the BBC are talking about a 25% unemployment in Spain. 7 million immigrants is off the UK Spanish main website, the government website. That's 14% of the population are now immigrants. And then you've got to wonder about the Isle of Man. I mean, if we bring 15,000 in, that's going to be, a 25% change in our of the population will be not from the Isle of Man if we go to 100,000 population. So all these policies, you just got to sit back and think, well, how is Spain doing it? 25% unemployment. I mean, that's a huge amount. You've got to wonder, why do they need to tax expats 100%? I mean, I'm asking a question. If somebody can come up with an idea as to why they're trying to do these things.
The Spanish president, one of the things he's saying is that they are looking at making sure that landlords just aren't profiting from having these properties there. And I don't think that's a new thing to be suggested.
No, but expats, according even to the BBC, are leaving Spain in record numbers due to rising cost of living and increased cost of electricity, as one of the components as to something that used to be cheap and now is getting more expensive. They're saying food and everything else is going up in price. So there are expats that are leaving in droves. Is this just going to accelerate that? And I mean, it's up to them. It's their country and they're a sovereign country. But I just wonder how they're going to end up if tourism is affected. I mean, you saw in, I think it was Lanzarote perhaps, and Tenerife, they were loads of people being led by a Welshman, I think, that were on the beaches telling the tourists that they're not welcome anymore. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me that one of their primary earners is sort of being reversed.
All right, Julian, lovely to talk to you as ever. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Beth.
All right, take care. That was Julian talking about what we heard in the news at midday with regard to Spain and the taxing of homes. Very quickly to the lines, and we can join Andrew Kelly. Good afternoon, Andrew.
Hi, Beth. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very quickly, about the seawall and the headline in the printed press or online, work to build controversial £900,000 seawall started without planning permission. And I'm reading here that it was approved, but the permission ran out and they carried on anyway. The consent expired on May the 1st last year, but they carried on doing it. So the question is, who was actually responsible for this in the government, in the Department of Infrastructure?
Now,
and what sanction has been brought against that person for not putting in a new application before they actually started work?
we have asked the government for a response on this. I'm just asking somebody to send me up the official word that we got on this, Andrew. But I suppose with something like this, you know, it's been started. It could be argued that actually it's not necessarily that unusual. Sometimes these planning issues have got a time limit, and then going back and getting it retrospectively is not completely unheard of.
But it's just wrong, isn't it? And it just shows that it's chaos in that department because they don't know what deadline dates are, and they don't stick with things and don't put applications in when they're supposed to.
Let's just bring you what the statement we were originally sent on this by the DOI. The Douglas Seawall project is designed to reduce the effects of overtopping in the future, as well as protect the Isle of Man government assets, specifically the Prom Highway and horse tram tracks. A new planning application at the time the statement came to us last year, or the year before actually, is now in place. Work fully commences on a section at the north of Broadway. The new submission is identical to the previous one, which expired on the 1st of May 2024. So again, I think this is not the first time that this has happened, Andrew, but I take your point.
Jolly good.
All righty.
But somebody should be sanctioned for it, for just letting it get to that stage in the first place.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Thank you for taking the time to call. Let's see if we can squeeze in the last of the texts and emails. If the Chief Minister is looking to make government savings, says texter ending 109, he should lead by example, cut MHK and LegCo salaries to £60,000, remove LegCo as it's a duplication of work. This would save around £600,000 a year and set an example to other departments. That's from Mr. NT. On the subject of too many MHK, says texter ending 580, can we also review the number of commissioners? An island of 82,000 plus residents do not need over 200 commissioners. Perhaps if we just had 3/4 districts as Southern and Northern as Central and Douglas, we would then possibly have a better calibre of candidates working for a region and not just a local bias. That is from Southern Andy. Again, something that keeps coming up, doesn't it? That local authority reform. I can remember them talking about that. When was it? Pam Crow was in Dalgety. That was many, many years ago. So a lot of these things that we're talking about today are not necessarily new subjects. Parking outside schools, especially St Mary's in Douglas, is utter chaos, says texter ending 496. At the end of the school day, parents parking on junctions and double yellows where children by foot cannot safely cross the road. It makes me so angry, and I wish they would all get parking tickets. And why in the name of God, says texter ending 376, would 15,000 people want to come here? And just finally, Nick says it's interesting to watch the UK COVID inquiry today on injuries and bereavement, a subject that also affects those on Ireland who were injured, says Nick, by COVID vaccines. I think we got through most of the texts and emails. Any that just come in now, I will read them, and if they need to be read out, I will do so on tomorrow's programme. If you think of something while we're not on air, then the number for the out of hours line is coming up. Christy D is here next with 1 to 3. I'll be back with you with update from 5. Take care. Speak to you then.
When the Mannin Line's not on air, call Manx Radio to leave your opinion for broadcast on 682 631.